Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance 6th Annual Summit. The 6th Annual Summit is broken down into a two-part summit series, so you are now with us for the second part of that summit series. Without further ado, I'd like to make a statement on behalf of the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance in light of the current Black Lives Matter protests and the death of George Floyd. The Wallkill River Watershed Alliance stands with the Black community and people of color everywhere as they continue to fight for justice. We fight for clean water because we fight for life. The fight for clean water is an environmental justice issue, and Black communities in our watershed have the right to a river they can eat from and swim in. It is the responsibility of the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance to educate ourselves and listen to the ways communities of color want to be engaged and work towards a healthy environment and clean water. If you have any suggestions about how the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance can improve on these matters, please feel free to reach out. We are learning, and this is a process that we want to take forward as we continue to fight for clean water in our watershed. Moving on to our sponsors, many thanks to Milone MacBroom, specializing in flood mitigation, river restoration, and community resilience. Milone MacBroom is proud to support the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance. Learn more about what they do at www.mminc.com. Engineering, planning, landscape architecture, and environmental science. They are at 231 Main Street in New Paltz, and you can call them at 845-633-8153. Also, thank you to Save Tillson Lake, the only place in Minnewaska State Park designed for fishing and one of 2 lakes where boating is allowed. A critical wildlife and wetland habitat that helps control pollution and protect the watershed. Visit savetillsonlake.org, and thank you to Friends of Tillson Lake. Also, thanks to Ulster Savings. Ulster Savings is proud to support the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance. Banking with US makes a difference. They give, they help, they care. Locations throughout the Hudson Valley. You can reach them at 866-440-0391 or at ulstersavings.com. Also, thank you to Mohonk Consultations. They are honored to support the work and vision of the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance. For 40 years, they have gathered to take it over at Mohonk. They look forward to welcoming us to the mountain and seeing us online soon. Again, thank you for attending the 6th Annual Summit. This is part 2 of our Summit series. It is presented by us, the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance, and many thanks to the Hudson River Watershed Alliance. They are sponsored by the Hudson River Estuary Program, New York State DEC, with support from the New York State Environmental Protection Fund in cooperation with NEIWPCC. Special thanks to Emily Vale for the technology support and letting us use the Zoom for hosting this conference. Emily, would you just mind giving people a quick briefing on the chat and how they can pose questions and how those questions will get answered?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Hi, everyone. Let me start my video here so you can see me. Thank you so much for coming today. So if you are new to the Zoom webinar, you'll see on the bottom panel, there's a chat feature. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like. And we also have a Q&A feature where you can post your questions during the presentation. So once Kyle is finished with his presentation, I'll field some of those questions and ask them of him, and then same with Jeremy's presentation. So over the course of the presentation, feel free to use the chat and the Q&A boxes, and we'll get to your questions once the presentations are done.
Thank you, Emily. So we'll start with my portion of the summit tonight, which is the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance Year in Review. My name is Kyle Sitzman. I'm the current chair of the board of the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance, taking on that role since we became a 501c3 this year. Will be followed by Jeremy Cherson of Riverkeeper. He's the Legislative Advocacy Manager at Riverkeeper, and his talk will be about effective relationships with your elected officials. So to start off our year in review, I wanted to begin by saying happy birthday to ourselves and to all of you for being part of the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance. We are now 5 years old as an organization, so I think that says a lot about the effort of all of you and all of the people involved in keeping this organization going and fighting for clean water in our watershed. This image here is from the first summit that was hosted 5 years ago. That was the kickoff event to bring awareness to the need for watershed protection of the Wallkill River. And from there, the organization formed and got us to where we are today. So what did we do this year? The first thing that we really are proud of is we're fighting dirty. So we had our annual sweep that in coordination with Riverkeeper throughout the Wallkill River watershed. There were 7 different sites, 7 different cleanup sites, and an estimated 800 pounds of trash removed from the river, which I think is amazing. What a haul. Here's an image here from of myself and others at the Sojourner Truth site, very appropriately holding a dirty broom that was swept out of the river. We also had our Adopt a Highway cleanups. So along Route 208, for those familiar with the New Paltz area, south of the village of New Paltz, sort of on the Gardner-New Paltz border, is Dressel Farms. And so we start there, and it's a mile stretch where we go up and down both sides of Route 208, picking up any trash that we can find, and it's our stretch of adopted highway ends at the Kleinkill tributary of the Wallkill. I was able to track down the name of it using the Hudson Valley Natural Resource Mapper that Emily talked about in her first chat in the session 1 of our summit. We also, in coordination with Riverkeeper, had several sampling sites. That was mostly last summer. Unfortunately, that has been on halt this summer in light of COVID and the pandemic. But we're hoping to get that going again in the future. And we also set up a monitoring page, basically asking that, and the link is here in the slides that will be sent out after on the email chain after this talk. But the monitoring page is for anyone who goes out onto the river to basically just talk about what they saw. So sort of just having eyes on the river to see, is there anything particularly problematic in terms of pollution or dumping? Did you paddle past an active CSO event? And overall, just what was your impression of the river? Where were you? And just to try and build more citizen science about the condition of our river. We also hosted several events, or were part of and participated in several events. 2 of the major ones being the regatta that everyone loves in New Paltz. And many thanks to the boat brigade who made this awesome boat. The plastic bottle that really was meant to bring attention to just the abundance of plastic in our society and how detrimental that is to the health of our environment and especially water. We came in 2nd place in the race and won the Green Award, which, let's be honest, we're the front runners for the Green Award, right? And we also hosted, special thanks to Martha Chow for organizing the first annual Wallkill River Race. This was a fun paddle race event that started in Truth Park, went up to the River to Ridge trailhead and back. And it was followed by some music and some food and some tabling and education. So that was a fun event as well. These events are made possible by a really committed core group, especially those on our board and core group of advisors. We have our monthly meetings that are open to all members. So we were meeting back and forth between a couple different locations. Obviously now we've had to switch over to meeting virtually, but moving forward, we're hoping to hold down a spot in the village of Walden. We've made a lot of connections there, especially with Lynn Thompson, who's a village trustee in Walden. She's been a great asset to the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance. She's full of energy in terms of protecting not only the Wallkill River, but the environment of Walden and Montgomery. She's really spearheaded the effort to try and resist a lot of the warehouse developments going on there. So she was very helpful in us securing a location to meet regularly in Walden. And then we also hold quarterly board meetings. That's where some of the not so fun stuff happens. Maybe you could spell that B-O-R-E-D sometimes, just kidding. But that's where some of those organizational meetings happen, especially as we pushed to become a 501c3. If you're interested, if you're not already a member but are interested in joining and becoming more engaged, please visit the link here, the wallkillalliance.org/join, or send an email to wallkillalliance@gmail.com to get on our email list. Some other things we did, especially in terms of education, are really important. Rob Ferry, our treasurer and member of the board, is a retired EPA inspector, and he has hosted educational events on municipal separate storm sewer systems. Municipalities who have MS4 are obligated to minimize pollutants entering the storm sewer system. And so he hosted a series of trainings for municipalities as part of their requirement. He also generated a report for those municipalities that are members of the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance. We hope moving forward that can be something that we do more regularly, which is a benefit not only in terms of growing our legitimacy with these municipalities, but also literally helps to protect our river. And our other main educational outreach is this summit that you are all attending now. A huge component of our last year was our organizational growth. We are now an official 501c3. Many claps to all who were involved in making that a reality. Some of the benefits of being a 501c3 include applying for our own grants. So previously, many of you may know Jason West, who is our founder and president, who has since left the watershed and left the area for a career in the Albany area. But he was grant funded through Riverkeeper. But now that we are an independent 501c3, we can go and apply for our own grants instead of relying on Riverkeeper. Now your donations to the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance are tax deductible donations. So when we go out looking for donations, we don't have to ask people, can you please donate to the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance, except can you make the check out to Riverkeeper? And I think part of that really goes into that public perception of legitimacy, that we're here and that we're looking out for something that we really believe in. Also, a huge benefit is perpetual existence. So we made this happen at the tail end of Jason's tenure with us, but now that he has left, this can continue on without him and beyond anyone who's currently with the board, which I think is really important because the fight for clean water doesn't end with the people that are there. We also had an organizational workshop. So members of the board and some core advisors were hosted by the Mohonk Preserve. They were nice enough to open up their meeting space to us in January. And it was coordinated with Riverkeeper, and special thanks to Rebecca Martin for working with us through that. But we did a SWOT analysis, which is a strength, weakness, and opportunity and threat analysis, where we discussed, really took a deep dive into the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance as an organization, and some of our, and where we want to go as an organization moving forward. We had addressed at that time, especially our weaknesses and lack of diversity, which is something that has really been thrust in front of us now, and a clear weakness that we need to work on, but also a great opportunity to reach out to communities that we failed to reach out to in the past. Another major threat was losing Jason, but is also an opportunity, and shows the strength of the board that we've been able to continue on since he's left. We've also tried to do our best to work with the Tinbrook and the Sawkill alliances, something that Jason really was spearheaded and really believed in, an alliance of watersheds throughout the Hudson River watershed and all the way down to us and to the smaller tributaries. So something that we hope that we can continue to build and work on going forward. Members of the Tinbrook Alliance, especially with the warehouse developments in Montgomery, we worked with closely in doing our best to help them in the review of various environmental reviews, and put a lot of effort and energy into that. Advocacy is so important. Jason and others had organized a roundtable that was hosted by the Hoot Owl. It was attended by 7 elected officials or staffers from multiple levels of government. There were 6 governmental agencies in attendance and 8 non-governmental organizations in attendance. So this was really a collection of people from various walks of influence, all there to hear us out and talk about what we can do to improve the health of the Wallkill River watershed. There we started to come up with various legislative requests, including agricultural non-point source pollution abatement and control funding, wastewater infrastructure funding, Hudson River Estuary Program funding, and watershed protection laws. So after this roundtable, we were able to collect our thoughts and follow up with, especially with the legislators in a letter stating the intent of what we wanted to see going forward from that roundtable meeting. Also, in terms of advocacy, is project review, which I had touched on earlier. The big ones this year were the warehouses in Montgomery, with the Sailfish and Medline. Obviously, there are many powers that be that are a lot larger than just a small watershed group. But we did our best effort to review their environmental applications and write our own letters in opposition, and trying to get these municipalities to realize the importance of protecting the watershed when coming up with various development projects. We also coordinate a lot with our friends with Tillson Lake, and asking for better wetland mapping throughout the watershed. We reviewed City Winery in Montgomery, and also a couple dam permit renewals, and writing letters asking for various aspects of their permits to be reviewed, especially in terms of how they can better improve the surrounding ecology. And that is the year in review for the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance. If there's anything glaring that I missed from anything that we did from any of our members who would like to add on to that, please feel free to do so in the chat or the Q&A box. But we are now open to any questions that for myself before we move on to Jeremy.
Great, thanks so much, Kyle. I see a couple of questions have come in on the chat. The first is from Diane Dintroff, and she's asking if the New Paltz Regatta has been canceled.
I So assuming that so SUNY, no word on SUNY for the fall. But yeah, as of now, it seems like they're maybe going towards virtual or a limited campus. But there hasn't been any official word on the regatta as far as I know. So I can't really speak to that. But if it does happen, I'm sure we will be entering as we do every year. But I haven't seen an official cancellation for the regatta in New Paltz yet. And is there kayak access on Sturgeon Pool? Is it a reservoir? Usually reservoirs are not, but I'm not positive that Sturgeon is actually a reservoir.
Sturgeon Pool is not a reservoir, but I think unfortunately there is also no kayak access currently.
Oh, there's not. Okay, so yeah, sorry, no kayak access on Sturgeon Pool. But RF Khan did a great presentation in the first part of the series about all the public access points along the Wallkill. And you can find that, I believe the website is Paddle the Wallkill. And if you, and that can be found on the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance page. And that there you can find all the different public access points along the Wallkill for paddling.
Okay, we have a question from Beth Hoffner. How many Town of Montgomery officials completed the MS4 trainings?
I am not positive about that. If Rob Ferry is on, Rob, I don't know if you would be able to answer that in the chat here. But I can get back to you on the exact attendee list of our MS4 trainings. There was two. We held two. I'm not positive that the Town of Montgomery was one of them. I know one was hosted for Ulster County, but I'm not positive one was directly for the Town of Montgomery. But they may have attended ones that were hosted elsewhere. Okay, great. Well, if there are no other questions for me, then I will pass it over to Jeremy.
Thank you so much, Kyle. Hello, everybody. Let me just switch the screen over here to my presentation. Can you see my PowerPoint? Great. So my name is Jeremy Cherson. I am the Legislative Advocacy Manager for Riverkeeper, and I am indeed glad that the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance is out from underneath the tyranny of our thumb and are your own 501c3. That's really exciting. That means a lot for my colleagues, Dan Shapley and Jennifer Epstein, who have worked with y'all for a long time to really make a strong voice from the community for the Wallkill River. And, you know, I had the good fortune of working with Jason and fielding a lot of his questions about how to engage with elected officials to further the mission of the Alliance and how to engage and what to focus on and how to strategize. And so I'm hoping that this presentation will, even though some parts of it will seem elementary to some people, everyone comes at engagement with their elected officials from a different place. Some people, their only engagement is reading about their elected officials in the news. Some are consistent voters. Others write letters to their elected officials and call every single day. There are varying degrees of engagement across the spectrum. Some of us do it professionally and end up in office settings with elected officials. This is Assemblywoman Sandy Galiff. This was a lobby day to talk about the EPF and specifically the Hudson River Estuary Program funding and other initiatives. So sometimes you're going up to Albany and visiting with them in times that aren't as challenging as we face right now. Other times, you know, the professional advocates are flanked by activists, and here we have State Senator Liz Krueger and Brad Hoylman at a press conference that we put together around 3 years ago, pushing for the plastic bag ban, which is now in effect despite some challenges with certain stores not complying. And we engage with elected officials for clean water because of a few reasons. One of the big ones is money. Wastewater treatment plants and pipes don't upgrade themselves, and most local governments do not have the money, do not have the tax base to upgrade facilities and pipes that are 50, 40, 30 years old. And many of the funding streams that are available are competitive, meaning the municipalities have to apply to receive the federal grants or the state grants, and your elected officials often stake their re-election on being able to argue that they were able to bring home significant amount of dollars to the local governments. Some of that money comes from the New York State Clean Water Infrastructure Act, which is one of those competitive processes, and indeed the Wallkill River and towns along the Wallkill River have received funding. However, they have not received as much funding as we believe they should. And we actually, I didn't look up the exact number, but Jen Epstein put together a fact sheet that has that I can share with everyone after, that has the exact amount of money that was included in the last environmental facility corporation analysis of what the Wallkill River watershed needs in treatment facility and upgrades. There are also agricultural programs that focus, you know, everyone on this, well, most people on this webinar know that the Wallkill River watershed receives a lot of water that flows off of agricultural land. And there are a lot of programs and grants for farmers, whether it's through the Estuary Program or Cornell, work with Cornell Cooperative Extension or the Department of Agriculture, that helps reduce runoff and helps provide farmers with resources to reduce runoff that can contribute to poor water quality. At the federal level, your members of Congress, one of which in the watershed is Antonio Delgado in the House of Representatives, and Sean Patrick Maloney, also in the House of Representatives, and of course our senators Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, can bring home federal money from different funding streams in different packages that are put together by Congress every single year. There are large-scale agricultural packages. There's the Water Resource Development Act, and engagement with your federal elected officials is a good way to advocate for them fighting to bring some of this money home to their districts. Another reason is influence. Having good relationships and engaging with your elected officials can help you have more influence in terms of highlighting projects of need and bringing money home. It can also help connect you and the organizations you work with to resources. Also, working with elected officials can help engage the media, build publicity and awareness around campaigns. And lastly, most importantly, you're the boss and you should get what you want. So some of the things that engaging and advocating with your elected officials helped get from the state budget this year and is heading towards the ballot in November, hopefully, is the $3 billion Bond Act, which hopefully, if voters approve, will open up new funding streams for projects all across the state. And this will be a competitive process, and towns, villages, counties are going to need all the help they can get competing for scarce dollars. $3 billion in a state as large as New York doesn't go as far as you think it would. Each year, for the past few years, we've been getting $500 million in infrastructure money, both for drinking water and wastewater. That is also a competitive process, as I explained. And the EPF, which of course the Environmental Protection Fund supports the Hudson River Estuary Program, which all of us hold near and dear to our hearts for all they do for this region and for the river. We also have to not only advocate for funding with our elected officials, we have to advocate for increased protections for wetlands and waterways. COVID-19 disrupted some of the legislative session this year where, hello kitty, where we were about to get new protections for wetlands, and it happened to fall off the agenda right as the pandemic hit. And then sitting on the floor of the state Senate is a bill that would protect 40,000 miles of streams across the state. It's already passed the Assembly, and we're pushing to get the Senate to pass it, to send it to the governor's desk. And so funding and standalone legislation that increases protections are some reasons why engaging with your elected officials is important. And you know, we want this funding and we want better protections because we don't want to have algal blooms and poor water quality in our watersheds. And thank you for this photo, Emily, that I use all the time. So lobbying is often derided and is a dirty word for people, but now that the Watershed Alliance is a 501c3, you are allowed to lobby in limited circumstances. And depending on whether you hit a certain cap with your advocacy with elected officials, but also officials who are not necessarily elected, unless you hit a cap, you do not have to report to the state agency that is known as JCOPE. And I'll get to a little bit more of that later, but lobbying is an attempt to influence state or local legislation or resolutions, state or local executive orders, state or local rules or regulations, rate-making proceedings, governmental procurements, compacts, or MOUs. I would not expect that the Watershed Alliance would hit a cap, but it would be important for the organization to, I think, to put on the agenda for a future meeting to contact the state agency JCOPE that fields questions to find out if you might hit a cap and if you need to think about setting up the ability to report your activities if you are going to be advocating a lot for certain items from local governments and from the state and from the federal government. So what are the methods that we use to engage elected officials? Well, one of the best ways, and if you happen to have elected officials that care a lot about clean water, cooperation and partnership. And I know the Watershed Alliance already has some great partners in government that they work with. And so, you know, that's what you've already done, setting up forums and events and working together, working to fight for funding for the Wallkill River and for municipalities. But when partnership and cooperation fails, that's when you need to start applying pressure. And applying pressure comes in many different forms. That could be the, writing letters to your elected official, stating your displeasure with a certain policy position they take or an action that they are taking. That could be phone calls, op-eds. It could be taking to the streets. And then another method of engagement, which 501c3s are prohibited from engaging in, is challenging the seat of an elected official in the electoral space. And so groups like Riverkeeper, groups like you all cannot do that. Only 501c4s can engage in endorsing candidates or knocking on doors or making phone calls for preferred candidates. So really, we are only able to engage in the first two methods here. And we leave the last one up to others. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can better set up smaller organizations to handle elected official affairs. It always helps to designate one person, or even better, if you have enough people, to designate a committee to handle elected official engagement and affairs. I prefer the committee structure for smaller organizations, particularly volunteer organizations, because it builds a deeper and broader expertise within the organization around engagement with elected officials and ensures that the burden is spread out. It also, and very importantly, builds redundancy, since volunteer leadership can often change and often does. And having a designee or a committee helps streamline relationships and trust with officials and or their staff if they know who to contact. And then lastly, to help facilitate engagement, it's helpful to keep an organized spreadsheet of engagement with the officials to ensure that knowledge is passed down over time. You're going to want to know if someone in your organization has reached out to Senator Metzger to ask her to do something, so you don't have 5 people from the organization reaching out. Elected officials are not one people shows. They have a whole constellation of people that work around them. This is particularly true at the federal and state level, not so much at the local level. So a little bit about the various people that you will find at the federal and state level. You'll often come into contact, if you're engaging with elected officials, you'll come in contact with chiefs of staff who run their entire operation and are kind of jacks of all trades in their offices. Legislative directors, assistants, and aides, who are oftentimes, if you are talking to someone in Albany or down in DC, or working on trying to get funding or trying to advocate for passing a certain law, the LD, which is what we shorthand the legislative director as, is the person you're going to want to talk to, because they're going to be the person that has the most up-to-date information about where the legislation or where the funding stands. Oftentimes, you'll talk to a scheduler to try and get your foot into the door to talk to the elected official or the LD or the chief of staff. If you're holding events locally, you'll run into the district director, and it's often good practice for organizations to get to know the district directors. They like to be in touch with local organizations. They are often a lifeline for the elected official to understand what is happening in the community and to take the temperature of the community. And then lastly, you have constituent services, which are more so helping connect individuals to receive benefits that they, unemployment benefits or VA benefits that they aren't receiving, et cetera. And then helpful for events that you are organizing is connecting with communication managers and directors. And here you'll see a photo from last year where Captain John Lipscomb and I took out New York State Senate staff on the Riverkeeper patrol boat on an outing as a form of elected official engagement. We didn't even talk about any bills, any funding. It was strictly a way to get to know the hardworking people that help make those offices run and help provide up-to-date information to the elected official that they rely on. So oftentimes with a constellation of elected officials and a constellation of goals and campaigns, it can be hard to decide who are the decision makers that can advance any given campaign. And so I often find it helpful to think of campaign planning around elected officials as focusing on your primary, your secondary, and your tertiary. Your primary target is the person who can ultimately give you what you want. And so you want to know if do you have someone in your organization that has an existing relationship with this person? If so, that person should be your direct line to that elected official. If not, you should start strategizing about how to make that connection so you can have a relationship. If it's tougher than just connecting with the elected official and you actually have to build a larger campaign, you want to think about the secondary targets. So those are the people that can influence the primary decision maker on your behalf. And you're going to ask yourself the same questions. Who has connections to those people? So if you're talking about a state senator as your primary target, if you're having trouble connecting with them or having trouble convincing them to support a certain advocacy goal or campaign, you're going to want to think about which mayors they listen to, which county legislators they listen to, which members of the community they listen to, and start getting in touch with those folks and see if you can get their help and support. I wanted to take a short fishing break because everyone here loves fish, to take a look at some herring swimming up the Wynantskill up in Troy for the first time in 80 years. So we'll be right back in 10 seconds. Wasn't that fun? All right, back to lobbying. So it's really important to build trust and mutual respect, but you also have to challenge when necessary. Given that it's hard to meet face-to-face right now, it's important to request Zoom calls. Face-to-face engagement with their elected officials is still best. It's still preferable. When public health officials give the okay, it'll be important to still meet in person. First outdoors and then indoors as conditions allow. When you're meeting, it's really important to be organized, be clear, and be respectful. Leave behinds are always mandatory when meeting with elected officials, particularly state and federal officials. And those should always be concise, no more than 2 pages. These people have a lot on their plate and they don't have a lot of time to read. And so having things bulleted out and being really clear and concise about what you want is really important. I've run into this many times with advocates who come up to lobby days. Don't forget your please and thank yous. It's so important, and the staff who work for the elected officials and the officials themselves notice when folks are not polite, and it makes a difference. Lastly, if there's disagreements and you're not successful in persuading the staff or the elected official, maintain your cool. I've seen a lot of meetings go off the rails. That does not help anyone's cause. After the meeting, regroup, and you can think about an escalation in tactics, reaching out to those secondary targets, those tertiary targets, thinking about if pressure needs to be applied, if cooperation and partnership doesn't work. And of course, you all already do this. Events with your elected officials are key to building that trust and relationship. Going to their events, attending their webinars is really important. Make sure you are on the mailing list for your state and federal officials. Make sure you invite the elected officials to your events. And if they can't come, ask for quotes, statements, or a recorded message. Film screenings are a really great way to engage the elected official because, one, it's easy for them because they don't have to do much except say a few words beforehand. But they also share the event oftentimes on their lists, on their mailing lists, which can help greatly increase the turnout for your event and help build your list and build your cause. After your meetings, follow-up is always vital. You want to write down and make sure you have in writing what items the staffers or the legislator committed to. And if they didn't get back to you with what was agreed upon by the set date, you have to follow up again. And if it still didn't happen, then you have to discuss with your committee escalation tactics, which may include some of the following tactics on that bullet point. And then lastly, handwritten notes are always appreciated. It adds a nice old school touch. People like handwritten notes. It shows that you care. It builds respect and trust. So lastly, I'm just gonna talk about a couple of tools that can be helpful for campaign planning. So I often ask organizations if they are omnipotent and all-powerful. If not, you should consider building coalitions. They can help you get your campaign done and achieve your goals. One way we figure out who exactly to reach out to and how to build that support is using an activity called Spectrum of Allies. And I'll go to a larger version of it here. And this can easily be drawn out by anyone, and it's a great thought exercise as you're thinking about campaigns and anything that is potentially controversial. You're going to want to do this exercise. The goal of this exercise is to try and map out everyone who you think is for or against your campaign, or other powerful organizations or groups, and place them along this spectrum. And part of the goal in your overall campaign planning is going to be figuring out how to move everyone to the left. You want to strategize how to move someone from an active opposition to passive opposition, from passive opposition to being neutral. If somebody is a passive ally, they write back, say, yeah, I support that campaign, but we don't really have time. If they're a powerful voice in the community, you're going to want to strategize how to turn them into an active ally. And so this is really a really helpful exercise, how to see the whole playing field before you kick off a campaign. And then another different way to do this is power mapping. Power mapping, and I'll go to the larger one, is another way to see where everybody stands. And so you can put elected officials, different businesses, organizations, community members along this spectrum. And you try to strategize very similarly to the spectrum of allies, how to move them into how to move the influential and powerful people into supporting your objective. And so this is an easy mapping exercise that can be, written out on any piece of scratch paper. And lastly, here are some resources to learn more. The clothing company Patagonia is a great company. They give grants to environmental organizations across the country, and they also hold a training for grassroots activists every 2 years. And they've been doing that for almost 2 decades. And they put together this book that takes the best of their trainings and from different campaigns, from protecting clean air to protecting watersheds and fish all around North America, into this book. I highly recommend it. Lastly, the organization 350.org, through this training exercise, has a lot of interactive activities in order to become stronger organizers and campaign planners. In terms of lobbying, this Boulder Advocacy Group is a great organization that helps 501c3s understand the legality of lobbying and working with your elected officials, and has a lot of resources that breaks down kind of the IRS mandates around that. And then lastly, here's the link to the Joint Committee on Public Ethics. And they have a lawyer of the day, and there's a phone number. Every weekday, they have a different one of their attorneys that staffs the phone, and you can just give them a call to ask them any questions related to the legality of 501c3s and advocacy with elected officials. And so thank you, everyone, and I'm happy to take questions.
Great, thanks so much, Jeremy. We had a couple of questions in the chat come in when you mentioned the cap on lobbying. If you could clarify if that's based on the money that's spent as a percentage of the total budget, what that cap is.
Yeah, it's the total budget and the number of hours spent lobbying.
Great.
And that's all on the JCOPE website. And
I had a question about that as well, actually. It's my understanding that lobbying, and I think you mentioned this in a slide too, that it's only when it's at specific legislation or resolutions. So if we were to make broad statements like we want more funding for water quality, is that considered lobbying, or does it have to be, bill number 501, we want this passed, which increases spending or something like that?
It gets a little convoluted because, I could call up every elected official in the state assembly and senate and say, I want more funding for clean water. And that would really only mean a couple things, the Clean Water Infrastructure Act, the EPF, or others. So that's a really murky line. I think it depends. That's a good question for JCOPE. I think it depends on context. I'm a registered lobbyist, so if I do that, I'm sure it's definitely considered lobbying. But if someone at an organization that has not hit the cap, Riverkeeper hits the cap, therefore we report, I'm not so sure that it would be considered lobbying.
Okay, great, thanks.
But, messaging around specific bills, specific packages is definitely lobbying and would count towards the hours.
Right.
We had another question come in on the Q&A. If the Wallkill River Watershed Alliance supports legislation, is it appropriate for you to circulate a petition for people to sign?
So is that a question? I think, well, if the question is if the Alliance could send a petition in support of legislation, if you fall underneath your cap, I believe so. And people can certainly sign Riverkeeper petitions or petitions from any other organization regarding legislation, but I wouldn't think that it wouldn't take that many hours and wouldn't add up to that many dollars for Kyle to forward a petition. And so I wouldn't be concerned that that would add up to a cap.
Good to know. Good to know.
That's all the questions that have come in on the Q&A and the chat. If there's anyone else.
I just had one follow-up about the regatta. It is looking like we'll still be in phase 2 of the reopening. So that would mean that there can't be any gatherings of over 10 people. So unless Cuomo says that gatherings of over 10 people can happen at that time, then it looks like the regatta won't happen. Oh, and then a follow-up from Rob Ferry, who hosted the MS4 trainings. There were 10 Montgomery municipal officials that attended the second MS4 training class, including the highway superintendent. So thanks again to Rob for his hard work in organizing and carrying out those MS4 trainings. And thanks for responding to the question. One other thing that if you didn't get the email or didn't see the email about the tree plantings on the Open Space Institute site at the River to Ridge Trail, we're doing a tree planting there funded by the Trees for Tribs program. So that's something that just got underway in the last month or so. Again, thanks to Martha Chow, who's got so much energy in doing all these event plannings. So check your emails for information on how you can get involved in planting some trees along the Wallkill River. Thank you all for joining. Any other questions before we end the summit? All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining. Hopefully we'll get to see you all again soon.